All right. Well, welcome. If you haven't had a chance to sign in, go ahead and sign in. Welcome, Birdie. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Can you all? Oh, very good. Well, I'm going to start today a little bit differently, and hopefully this will work for me. This is a video that is going to be my initial lecture. Today we're going to talk about systematic reviews and randomized control trials. Some of the things in those two methodologies are things called forest plots, confidence intervals, effect size, some pretty heavy statistics. So I'm going to use a little video to help start the dialogue around this. If you had a chance to go to the CTEP immersion last fall, this will be something that is familiar to you, but it gets in your head and it's really hard to get out. So I will warn you, there's music. You can dance, sing, whatever, the words are different. So this is a video called Viva la Evidence. It is from YouTube. It is available for anyone to use anytime to share the message about evidence. So it's kind of fun. So in academia, you can use it for nursing. So if anybody would like the link, I would be happy to send it to you. So we're going to start with a short video. Hopefully it will work. Oh, come on.
I used to view the world as a place where I gave the word. It had the feeling of eminence. Then along came evidence. I used to give advice, see disarray in my patient's eyes. I listened to the company say, now the old drug is dead, we got anything. 1 minute I held the key, the next the walls were closed on me, and I discovered that my practice stands upon pillars of salt and pillars of sand. I hear the evidence bells are ringing, systematic reviews are singing, clinical evidence is the maxim, NNTs are now my passion. For some reason I can't explain, clinical studies are in my brain, always and all this world, and now it's how I view the world. Knew they were more than dots. Confidence intervals show the line. I can figure out wrong from right. Writing numbers, they can wait. I want absolute numbers on my plate. Values and preference really make all the difference. Keep the evidence bells ringing, systematic reviews are singing, clinical evidence is the maxim, NNTs are now my passion. For some reason I can't explain, clinical studies are in my brain, always in all this world, and now it's how I view the world. how I view the world.
Isn't that a great stats lecture? I thought this is wonderful, and it wasn't actually developed by Bern Melnick and her staff. It was actually developed by a group of dentists that in the UK, and they actually approached Coolplay and said, "Hey, we're interested in using your song. Is this okay? This is what we're looking at," and that's good. So therefore, we have a song. But in essence, that was all about systematic reviews and all the things we think about. But I like the fact that there's people other than nursing thinking out of the box to say, how can we look at evidence? How can we do things differently? So, but the song gets caught in your head. So now you'll be thinking about that little song all day, and I apologize. But I'm going to show just a few slides about systematic reviews. And again, the slides are from CTEP. And what I want to do in a short hour is show you how we can talk a little bit about the systematic review and the randomized control trials. And then we are going to quickly take the 2 articles that we sent out and go through and appraise them. The process, as you get better at it, should only take you 15, 20 minutes max to review an article. It does take lots of practice, and that's why we're doing these sessions, is to give you a chance to do them together, and then as you are reading your own articles, to begin to use the tools for yourself. So we're just going to go through a few. I'm going to just hand pick a few slides. This is in the folder for the 4th month for April, and I'm not going to cover the entire series of slides. I just want to pull out a few that talk about some of the statistics that you'll see in a systematic review or a meta-analysis. Systematic reviews, just to remind you, is the highest level of evidence. It's our gold standard. If you can find systematic reviews, and then even better, a meta-analysis about the research that you're wanting to cover, that's all you need to do. If you've got a really good systematic review, you don't have to look at any other evidence. I still go out and look a little bit more to make sure there's not anything I'm missing. But if you can find one of these, it's like, okay, I'm ready to change practice, or I'm not, based on what we find in the evidence. With a systematic review, they go out and they search the literature for you. They may find literally thousands of articles that may meet your topic. From that search, they identify a multiple criteria for what they want in this review. They want to look at the sample. They want to look at the population. They may look at the methodology, so that I'm looking at apples and apples when I'm writing this summary. They get a team of people, usually a minimum of 2 to 3. And they usually like 3 because an odd person can always, break a tie if something is not agreed upon. But they'll get a team of people that are experts in that subject to look at these articles, and they're tasked with identifying the inclusion and exclusion category, very much like a research study, but the research is in fact the review itself. So they identify the entire mass of literature that's out there. They're identifying what is the inclusion criteria for the articles, and then they identify what is the method we want to look at, what are the type of statistics we may want to consider, what is the research question that we want to answer. And begin to pull it together. So a systematic review is it's kind of like if you did a summary of articles that you read, it is that summary of those however many articles. To take it to the next step is a meta-analysis. They take the actual data from the different studies and they rerun the analysis. So if I had, in study 1, I had 1,000 people, in study 2, I had 500, study 3, I had 1,000, there's 2,500 people right there. I now have a very large study. But they take all of the data of these studies that are alike, and they aggregate it, or they pull them together, and then they rerun the data. They rerun the statistics. So instead of having just these small studies with 250 to 1,000 people, now they have maybe 10,000 people that they are now looking at in the analysis. And what happens is you get a very robust study. So if you can find a meta-analysis, that means not only did they do the research for you and find X number of studies, And they don't have to all be randomized control trials. They can be a mix of different types of studies, but they look at studies that have the same research question, the same general methodology and analysis, and now they rerun this data into this one outcome. And the article that I gave you is an example of that for this month. So we're going to take just a few minutes to look at a couple of key slides. And again, this presentation in its entirety is in the folder. But the whole purpose of this slide is to really look at the systematic review. You've seen this table before. We're looking at the whole question, the clinical inquiry, creating the PICO, searching for the best evidence, and then we're now at that appraisal stage of what we're looking at in the process. This is another view of kind of an evidence table. We are looking at that filtered information, that systematic review piece right at the top of the pyramid. So again, our strongest gold standard of research. Any of the evidence on these triangles can be used to guide practice change. Based on what your question is, some questions may only be expert opinion or descriptive studies, cross-sectional studies. So don't get frustrated as you're looking at your own project if all you can find are those lower level quality in terms of research. But if you can find something in the upper tiers, it's even better. But this is just, again, a reminder of what we look at on the sheets. Here's just another view. So our systematic review meta-analysis is that very top piece up there. With a systematic review, you're looking at a narrative description. So as you're looking at this type of an article or this type of paper, there will be a narrative summary. There's going to be an integrative piece which puts together many tables, figures, that pulls the data, so it summarizes all those articles for you so you can do a quick review. Some people really learn better from looking at tables and figures than reading the narratives. They'll usually also have a statistical analysis section. And then they may or may not have the meta-analysis piece, which is that rerunning the aggregate data into a bigger statistics. So this is kind of your gold standard if it has all these elements. And this is just a definition that talks about the different aspects. The big thing with systematic reviews, and we're going to see it as we look at the tool, did they have a clear clinical question that they were looking at? Did they tell you what their inclusion and exclusion criteria was in order to identify their numbers of articles? Now, if I see a systematic review and they said, we did this massive review of the literature and we found 4 articles, I might not think that, unless they can tell me how they got to the 4 articles. The article that we're reading today, or that we're talking about today, I think they found over 6,000 articles on CODIs. They reviewed in detail 118 of those studies. And then their 3 reviewers got it down to 14 studies that they felt were the same enough, met the same criteria that they could actually pull that data and rerun analysis. So in reading it, if they had only said, well, we found 14 studies, I might go, okay, 14 studies, that's a fairly good number. But the fact that they explained to us that they started with over 6,000 and how they got down to that 14 studies made it better. The protocol on how they reviewed the process and the detailed search strategy. Every systematic review should have a detailed, what were my search terms? What databases did I use? How did I go through the process of review, appraisal, analysis to get to these articles? They're going to also, were the studies assessed for quality? Were they assessed for validity? If they had a meta-analysis, did they look at the quantitative aspects? And there'll be a summary there for you. And what I like about systematic reviews, they have amazing tables. And in the video, we talked about forest plots. The forest plot is how they demonstrate the summary of the data. So that's why I wanted to spend a couple of minutes to show you what forest plots are. This just talks about systematic reviews. As we begin to create a forest plot, it's going to be a diagram that takes into consideration the confidence intervals confidence intervals of the data. If I have a confidence interval of 95%, it means if I have a bell curve, those 2 ends of the bell are each 2.5% to 2.5%. So I'm saying if I cut that bell with just those two little tails off, 95% of the data is going to be in the curve. Does that make sense? If they say 95%, they say 99%, that means 0.5% are on the two ends. So 99% is even a more rigorous approach, and it includes almost the entire bell curve. So with most of the research is based on a 95% confidence interval, and they're looking at data plots. So if all of my subjects in the process of whatever their question is going to be a dot somewhere in that bell curve, they're going to look at all those dots. And for confidence intervals, they're going to look at the range. So if my range is 1 to 250, that's a pretty big range of a mean or an average. If my dots are 1 to 4, that's a very tight margin. Does that make sense? Hopefully. So we're going to look at how wide was the confidence interval. And then we're going to take the very middle of that range, 0 to 100, the middle would be 50. And we're going to create a line. And as you see on this, and I don't have a plot, the 0 on this picture is the middle part of the range. It's not the number 0. If my range is -5 to +5, yes, the middle would be 0. But it's just the middle of your mean of all the dots. Does that make sense? I'm trying to make this somewhat easy to understand. So this becomes your confidence interval spot, and as you look at each study, will have its own unique line. So for this picture, we've got 4 studies represented. And we see that all of them but one are crossing the line. So as we go through, I'll explain what this means. So as we look, most forest plots, and the one that, unfortunately, the article that I gave you didn't have squares. So that's going to be an issue that we're going to talk about as why we don't know if that's good or bad. Every article in a truly well-done systematic review is going to have a little square. And in that square, the smaller the square, the smaller the effect. So a little tiny square means we had a very little to minimal effect. A very large square means we had a large effect. Effect size are measured on a 0 to 1. So a small effect might be a 0.25 or a 0.3. As you get around the 5s, so 4 to about 7, that's a medium effect. Anything above a 0.7 would be a large effect. So as they talk about effect sizes, they're going to be reflected in the size of a square. So does that make sense? So we've got here, it looks like we've got a couple of maybe small to medium effects, and then maybe large effects. So we'd have to see all 3 squares to know, okay, this is large, this is, but for here, these could actually be maybe a small and a large effect or a medium effect. The triangle represents statistical significance. Your squares or your effect size are clinical significance. So the bigger the square, the bigger the clinical significance. The bigger the triangle, the more significant or more statistically significant the outcomes. So if I'm looking at statistics, if I have a little bitty square, it's probably at the 0.05, which means great, it's shown statistically significance. And you'll see on some of the ones, the article that we looked at has a giant triangle stretched out. It was a 0.0001 or something. So if it's extremely significantly, it's going to be this big triangle. So as you look at forest plots, you're going to look at squares, you're going to look at triangles, but you're also going to look at the line. Remember that line that goes in the middle is your median line for your confidence intervals. As you look at the lines, there are different lengths. Some are shorter, some are longer. So it means their confidence intervals are made up by the lines. The shorter the confidence interval, the better the study. And you notice the ones that have shorter ones have a little bit bigger squares, so stronger effects. The overall study shows that it favored, in this instance, it favored the control group over the treatment group, and it was statistically significant. So it says if I looked at this correct, the left side says this was my treatment, the effectiveness of this treatment that we put in place as compared to the control group. Our treatment wasn't very effective. Statistically significantly, our control group did better. So this would be an intervention that we'd have to go, okay, now, is this positive or negative? It depends on your question. If I'm asking a question about, let's see, smoking. You're watching different people smoking and you're looking at cancer rates. Our smoking group has a rate of X. Our control group or our non-smoking group has Y. If we're looking at rates of cancer and does it predict the development of cancer, my control group would be where it would be my non-smokers, and I would hope that that group would be statistically and clinically significant about not developing cancer. So does that make sense? I was trying to figure out an example. So you can have a negative or a positive, and it depends on how your question is asked. So as you're looking at forest plots, you want to know, is it going to be an inverse? Do I want it to be the control group that's the better group, or do I want it to be the intervention group that would be the more positive? So we look to see, okay, there's the center line. If the study crosses the line at any point, that study itself is not statistically significant. So it's a really quick way to look and go, okay, the first study is definitely statistically significant toward the control and has a moderate to large effect based on the square. Now the second study, I have to look really, really close, but it's not touching the line. It's almost touching the line, but it's still statistically significant and has that medium to large effect. Okay, what about the third line? It's pretty big, so it's got a big confidence interval, smaller effect, so probably medium to low effect. It crosses the line, so it's not statistically significant. The last one, again, large confidence interval, little square, small effect, and it crosses the line, so it's not statistically significant. That's really all you have to know about forest plots. And I know in the video it's kind of, but if you have, the only place I've ever seen forest plots are in systematic reviews and meta-analysis. That's when you use a major summary of statistics is when you're using this kind of data.
So that last one is the summary of everything.
So this little one at the bottom is the total summary for the entire project. And when they synthesized, or when they aggregated the data and they ran it all together, we have a very small confidence interval and a very large statistically significant effect. So overall, that would mean that this would be a good study. If it was looking at a negative, so we're looking at the intervention maybe being prevention or something as opposed to a reverse. So sometimes, again, the study, absolutely, that your placebo people did better than your drug people, so you wouldn't want to give that drug. That's a great thought. And remember to hit your mics. So I think that's all I wanted to show, because this is just kind of going through all the different ones. So now so this is what it looks like in an actual paper. I mean, it's kind of small to see, but it shows you, it gives you your actual confidence intervals. So for that first one, that Vinicky study, our mean is 0.09 with a range of 0.01 to 0.56, and then we go down. So for this study, the first study, small square, so maybe small effect. The second study has a smaller confidence interval and a larger clinical significance, but it's crossing the line, so we know it's not statistically significant. The third one, and this one is our rehabilitation, is our intervention against our control. The third study, fairly small confidence interval, fairly small square, so small effect. It's statistically significant because it doesn't cross the line, so probably a good study. The fourth study crosses the line, small effect, so small clinical effect, not statistically significant. And the last study, small effect, but it is statistically significant. What's interesting, though, is overall, they find a fairly large statistical significance for the aggregated data. So I've got a large triangle that favors the intervention. So overall, this is a good study. So does that help make sense? Okay, anybody have questions in Verdi? Does this seem to make sense what I'm saying? Yes? No? Okay. Just speak up. Okay, good. So now I'm going to flip us because we could, see if I can get this to turn. If I can hit the right button to get out of this one. Okay, in show. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up our first article. I can get the right. And I'm going to make this as big as I can. Let's see, so we can read some of it. Okay, this first study, and I picked this one because I thought with all the stuff we're doing with catheter-associated urinary tract infections across our hospital and organization, it's a great one to try to think about. So this was a system, and now does everybody have a tool in front of them? Because I've got some more up here, and hopefully Melanie was going to print some tools. Excellent. Because I'd like you just to write notes on the actual evaluation tool, as opposed to making 500 copies of, and hopefully we have enough. If not, we can share some. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Can you guys read that? Is that okay? Okay, this was a systematic review and a meta-analysis. So what I'd like us to do is in 15 minutes or less, I'd like us to run through the tool. And I'm going to have to grab one. I guess I could get the one that has my notes on it. That probably makes sense. So did you all have a chance to read the article? I mean, I know I sent it out. What did you think about the article? Good, bad, indifferent? No thoughts? Okay. Well, hopefully at least somebody read it. And my goal is always to send them out as much as possible because you'll get more out of the class if you've read the article. I'm going to focus. So it says it's right up front, systematic review, meta-analysis. I love when articles tell us what they are because then you go, oh, I got this. We know at least this is a level 1. It should be a gold standard article. I picked this one. It was easy to read and it was short, even though there's some missing elements. So this is looking at patients that are hospitalized patients with Foley's. So we like this. I'm going to pull down so everybody can see the background. It talked about it looking at 2 elements. One is, would it trigger some sort of a notification to doctors and nurses that the Foley's in? Would that help? Versus a stop order that would automatically generate after a certain point in time that would tell the doctor, I need to reevaluate my Foley. Both are potentially good interventions, both potentially good thoughts, and so they looked at that prolonged catheter use and the increase in urinary tract infections, something that we're looking at on a regular basis. The method was they took it where it says methods. They looked at Medline, Cochrane Library, and a whole bunch of others and did an evaluation to look at just those 2 elements, whether there were alerts to doctors or nurses or whether there was those stops. They evaluated 6,679 articles, actually reviewed 118, and then came up with 14 that actually met their selection criteria. So as we begin to look through our appraisal tool, the very first page is pretty easy summary. We're going to, if you were doing this for real, for a project, you would fill out the whole top. And it says my project title, my date, the reviewer, because you'd be working in teams. If you were going to write this up or you were going to do this for an evaluation table, you'd get the article citation, your PICO question. We didn't create a PICO question for this, so you would look at what that question was that you're wanting to survey, and you'd make a general discussion about whether you felt this was a good article or not. So where you really start that appraisal is, what was the purpose of the study? So for us, it was really evaluating those two criteria around CODI prevention. And their design was a systematic review with meta-analysis. So what that tells me right off the bat is they did the literature review, but they also aggregated the data and re-ran statistical analysis to see, was this effective? And they actually looked to see if one intervention was more effective than the other. So I think it's a very strong approach to looking at this article. And then it says, what were the samples? In the article itself, we can go down, I'm going to pull. What was nice about this article is it has this huge table, table 2. I think it's table 2, or table 1, that describes all of the outcomes. It's a 2-page, there's a generalized outcome one, and then table 2 gives you a summary. So this one talks about the different types of studies. So table 1 looks at, the overall outcomes that they looked at within all 14 of the articles. Table 2, if you slide down, looks at the characteristics of all 14 studies. So in this, what they're giving you basically is an evaluation table. Really nice, neat evaluation table. So you can very quickly peruse through and see populations, the sample sizes, the setting for the study, the description of what they found in the intervention. So a nice little review. So our question here is, what are the sample sizes? Well, if you were filling one of these out, there's a couple of ways you can look at it. You can look at the sample as strictly being the number of articles. So in that sense, they reviewed 6,600 and something and came down to 14. Some people will want to know the individual sample sizes. You can rate that if you're looking at, okay, these were studies that ranged from 1,000 to 2,000 people, an aggregated sample of 10,000. You can record both of those. It depends on what you're looking at and what you want to get out of the article. For me, my first thought was they looked at 6,600 articles and they came up with 14. So my sample is really the 14 articles they used to summarize the data and then to aggregate the data. It's important later to look at the samples within the studies for another question. So does this first page make sense to you? Okay, so we're going to head to the second page. Did the systematic review meta-analysis address a focused question? What do you think? Yeah, all of their studies were very particular to interventions around urinary tract catheters. And it says, was the focus a clinical question? Yes, it was. And to me, that makes it very applicable to the things that we would look at in healthcare. So that first one's definitely a yes. Was the search relevant? Was the search relevant for study, detailed, and was it exhaustive? I think looking at 6,000 articles, that's pretty exhaustive. I think that's pretty, I'm pretty good with that. Trista, push the button.
When it comes to the 6,000 articles, because in their methods section, I don't remember seeing that they said which words they looked up. Because some do that, right? Like they'll say, we use.
That's a good question.
Because how do they get 6,000 articles? Like, are they just using
there's their study selection. Here was their study process.
Okay.
It says that they looked at, they did their search in 2008. They looked at Medline, Cochrane databases. Let's keep going. PubMed, journals, medical subject headings. They used mesh heading databases. So, and then they went down and told you what search terms they actually used. So all that italicized area.
Articles then would be like an article that urinary tract infection was just in the title of that one. Okay.
And they got rid of everything that did not include those two criteria. Okay. Was there an alert or was there some sort of an auto stop? So that talks about, so I think yes, I think that was a pretty good search. Did the systematic review include RCTs? In their description, and it's somewhere in here, it talked about they had one randomized control trial, and the others were, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head what they were. Yep, pre-post studies. One relevant, let's see. Okay, here's their criteria. But yeah, they looked at pre-post studies, looking at an intervention with pre-post. So I would say yes, there was at least one randomized control. Analyzed the assignments in groups, completed follow-up with subjects, blinded and double-blinded. I couldn't answer those as a yes because I couldn't see clearly from their description if they took it down to analyzed, assigned groups. It did talk about the fact that the 2 reviewers read all the articles. The 3rd reviewer went in, validated, and they went from 16 down to 14 articles. But it didn't say exactly what they were using in terms of criteria. Sometimes they will tell you that. So for this, I put no on analyzed assigned groups, completed follow-up for subjects, blinded and double-blinded. And that's okay. I mean, we're still saying, okay, we had at least one strong level of evidence. So number 4, did the systematic review analysis include non-RCTs? Yes. They included other experimental design, the pre-post design. And again, they didn't clearly identify those subcategories. Erica, push the button.
When you're considering levels of evidence, and let's say your meta-analysis covers, 20 to 30 articles, and you have 4 RCTs versus you have 6,000 articles and you only have 1, does that water down the sample at all?
You hope that there's going to be more than one randomized controlled trial, but we're in nursing. And we don't do a lot of randomized controlled trials in nursing research. It's not ethical to say, okay, you get the treatment, you don't. So a lot of what we see are non-experimental or experimental non-randomized studies in nursing. So I wouldn't expect to see a lot of randomized controlled trials. Ideally, if you have more, it adds strength. But you want to see that, were there any? And in some systematic reviews, there are none. So it makes it a little harder, but you just, you recognize what are the strengths and weaknesses of this paper. Were the included studies appraised to be high quality? It was hard to tell from their summary tables. They didn't give you a high quality ranking. So they didn't give you, they didn't say, well, on a 1 to 4, it's high or low. So they didn't really tell you that, but it did meet their criteria. So this one was kind of an unknown for me on there. They appeared to be well-developed studies, but they didn't tell you whether they were ranked as high or low. And again, that's one of those questions you have to decide, is that enough to say, oh, I'm dropping this article? Or do you feel from the descriptions of the studies, they closely meet what we're working on here? Were the methods consistent from study to study? Absolutely. They looked at 2 groups of studies. One group was defined as the stopped order to remove, and the other set was the ones that said reminder. So they defined them into their groups of what they were looking at. So that one was good. Were the results consistent across the study? Best I could tell, as you were looking at their summary table, and again, this was table 2, that's really where you had the evidence to look at. They talked about the computer used, the daily use. These seemed very similar in studies, nurse-generated studies, similar settings. So probably yes on that one. Any thoughts? If that seemed to make right? Okay, so then we go up to number 8, freedom of conflict of interest. There was a generic statement somewhere in the article that said that there was no, the very last, potential conflicts of interest, all authors, no conflicts. So there was no conflict statement, and there didn't appear in their write-up to be anything that I would have seen as a conflict. So probably it was fine. Date range for literature search. This one was pretty broad, 86 to 2009. What do you think about that? I mean, we're looking at COTIs. They've been around a while. Think that was appropriate? Okay, push your button there. Okay.
You really don't have that many studies in nursing that you can necessarily utilize, so a broader spectrum of time would be better.
I mean, I don't know how many interventional studies are out there about COTIs, so I don't think it was a negative. And in looking at the actual studies, some of them were how to do a meta-analysis in clinical trials. So some of them were related to the method of doing a meta-analysis as opposed to actual CODI. So I think they were probably okay for this study. So we just completed our validity piece, and so far I'm thinking it's a pretty valid group. Erica.
One of the things I think Jody and I were talking about that's valuable to look at is if you have a hallmark study from that field of research. So sometimes
Absolutely.
that skews your date range. You'll have something from like 1979 that was like the hallmark, the first one of its kind. And so you include that because it's important to see where things have trended. But then maybe potentially the rest of your studies are from like 2005 on.
Absolutely. Here, okay, the next, as we go, so this was validity. I think we have a valid study. So far as we go through, I would say, yep, let's keep going. If as you finish this first section, you had more no's and really your gut was going, you know what, I'm just not feeling this article, you'd stop right there and you'd be done. But I think we've got enough good about this article. We keep going. Majority of the questions are being answered yes. So I think we're okay. So the next piece that you want to look at is the reliability of the data. So is this data something that I could use to change my practice? So they had several summary type of figures and diagrams. This first one, sorry, I'm getting all kinds of emails. Well, we're here, thank you. Sorry about that. This first one, it doesn't have a title. The figure says summary of catheter-associated urinary tract infections. So this is looking at the different studies and what they reported in terms of CODI outcomes and urinary CODI use outcomes. So that's some good information that we're going to need to think about here as we look at this reliability piece. So it gives you some nice percentages, some nice little summary table, and then they give us their version of the beginning of forest plots. Now there's a few missing elements in these forest plots, but it looks pretty good. Theirs is a little different in the fact that they use a dotted line as opposed to a hard line to represent their median point. So just not exactly the normal forest plot, but you've got your confidence intervals to the right. And so you can see that there were some that were, the mean is 0.24 with 0.15 to 0.37. And they weighted their evaluated confidence intervals, so they've weighted the significance of them. I would imagine these dots are their clinical significance. They're probably the squares, but they're so small, I can't tell if it's a square or not. So I'm assuming from this, based on how you do a forest plot, that these are the little squares. So what would you think about the clinical impact? And this one is looking at the rate ratios for CODIs based on 1,000 per 1,000 catheter days. So clinical significance, just knowing what we've learned about forest plots, what do you think about clinical significance? Little one is small, medium, and then large. So we have maybe a low clinical significance because their little squares are so small you can barely see them. Okay, we do the first study, small confidence interval. Second study, fairly broad, but look at where that little dotted line is. So if we're looking at the dotted line, crossing the dotted line means it's not statistically significant. So our first study, statistically significant. Second study, statistically significant. Third one, not. But for this first section, it says reminders. We have a statistical significance of 0.001. So they have a very large statistical significance, but it's crossing the median. So that says, well, it looks large, which is good, and compare that to the triangle down below, which is much smaller. So they're saying it's very strongly statistically significant, but it is along the median line. So some of the studies were good, some of them were not. As you look at the stop order, first one has a big confidence interval, small effect. Second one, again, crosses all of these but one are crossing that median line. But and it says a p-value of 0.403. So it's not statistically significant, and it's moderate, and the overall is a 0.001. Because their dots are so small, I am not sure if they were truly saying, and they don't tell you whether it's intervention or control on here, so their forest plots are lacking. They're not clearly defined, but they do show that there is some statistical, significance with a reminder. Now, this is just one of their charts. Let's go down to some of the other ones.
Why is it that a key is not included along with that study?
Well, that would be a failure, a limitation of this article. So as we're reading this article, I go, well, okay, they didn't provide us which was intervention, which is control. And this one is very similar. This is the meta-analysis for the actual risk ratios to know the percentage of risk, how likely they are that they're going to have a CODI develop. And again, all of them cross the significance line, but I'm not sure. On this one, it looks like our significance line is maybe the hard one, the solid one. So I have a problem with this article's tables. I don't think, because their dotted line, I don't know if that is something else that they're intending for it to be. If the hard line is their one, and as we're looking at this, the range appears to be from 0.25 to 6, so or negative 125 to 6, so it really doesn't seem like it runs down the middle of their ranges. So even though I think with the first part of this was very valid, as I start to look at their data and start to look at what the charts say, I have some concerns about this article. So I've got here, it says I've got a p-value of 0.073. It's greater than 0.05. So that would mean it's not statistically significant, but it's very large. And it's a reminder where you've got your small. So I'm wondering, when they wrote this, if she was thinking about her clinical effect, because as they did the narrative part of this study, in the summary, it talks about the impact of the reminder orders being much better than just the stop orders. So you see how large this triangle is down at the bottom, and this again is the reminders. I'm wondering if he or she was trying to demonstrate that they had a strong clinical effect, even though they weren't statistically significant. So I liked this article in the way it was written, how it pulled together, but definitely our charts began to make us really curious. So as I'm looking back at this, and I say, okay, what are the main results for the systematic analysis and the meta-analysis? What are the effect size? It's not real clear. Are the effect size the little baby dots? Are they the triangles? They didn't give us a clue as to whether they were going to be following traditional forest plot, and every forest plot I've ever seen are like the ones on the slides. So I have a question about that. So I would say, well, I'm not sure. Did they give summary statistics? Yes, they did. They gave us they actually typed out for us the confidence intervals, and they gave us some statistics here. And then they look at the summary stats, and they look at confidence. I didn't see standard deviations. I did see confidence intervals, and I did see p-values. Some of these studies have a very wide confidence interval. Some are very narrow. So on number 10, I'm a little concerned about being able to be confident that what they're presenting in their meta-analysis is actually strong data. Number 11, were the results clinically significant? Well, I'm not sure. If the triangles are representing that, yes, we had this big, large effect, then I'd say yes. But again, they didn't follow traditional forest plot, and so I'm not confident in that. Statistically, they had some fairly good numbers. They had some statistically significant data, but clinical effects, if I'm following the little tiny dots as traditionally to being my clinical effects, I would say very minimal to low clinical effects, but they were statistically significant. So as we go down, it says there are potential co-founders identified. I really didn't see a lot of information about secondary variables, co-founder variables. They talked about, let me get to avoided catheter-associated events. There was definitely a decrease in infection. And here's another one of those that has the giant triangles, but I'm not sure what those are for. I mean, I would say that this is a 0.01 and a 0.001, so maybe it's just looking at statistical significance. So as we go through, I mean, what I thought was going to be this amazing, amazing article, I have some holes. And it talks about adverse events. There weren't any adverse events presented in the article. So now how are you feeling about the article? Verdi, what do you guys think? You were going to try to use these interventions. Now you've gotten to the actual data. What do you think? I mean, statistically, it was significant. Any thoughts? Do you think this is something you'd want to integrate into practice? Is your mic working? No thoughts. It's okay. I'm not one to pick on anybody. What about anybody here? I mean, we are seeing statistically significant data, and it will go back up. Huh? Yeah. We are. And so so let's go back up. We're going to run out of time, so I'll share our other article for the next time. But I want to make sure we're doing this right. But look at this data. Their results said that they reduced their CAUTI rate by 52%, 0.001. And and that was with the use of the reminder or stop order, either one. They decreased their duration of catheterization by 37%. That sounds great. With 2.61 fewer days. That sounds amazing. And then as they begin to look down here, they looked at differences in the types of procedures, and really looked at they looked at recatheterization. So that could be a co-founder. So what they're saying is that urinary catheter reminders and stop orders appear to reduce the rate of CAUTIs and should be strongly considered to enhance safety. So this was one of those articles that as I got into it, I wasn't as pleased with the article as I thought. If this was the only article out there to guide practice, what it would tell me is statistically they had some great outcomes. This is something I may want to consider if I don't already have in place. We've already put in place a reminder that says, hey, docs, we got a catheter in here. We already have a nurse-driven protocol, which they didn't talk about in this article, that tells us we need to take a catheter out if it's not necessary, if evidence doesn't support it being there. So I think we're ahead of this practice. Go ahead, Tris.
Well, with the articles that they find statistically significant, could you pull those ones out to guide your practice?
Well, what they're reporting as statistically significant is that meta-analysis, where they took all the data and pulled it together. Definitely what I would do is go back and pull those 14 articles and see individually what those articles said. But because they didn't address really the clinical significance, and just to remind you, just a second, I'll get to you. The clinical, you can have statistical significance and no clinical significance. You can also have clinical significance and it not be statistical significant. Clinical significance means that in the clinical setting, if you do X, it causes a positive outcome, and that outcome can be small, medium, or large in terms of being an intervention. So the way she presented her data, or he, it wasn't traditionally clear. Maybe the giant triangles were that, yes, this was clinically significant, but because it wasn't in the traditional format of a forest plot, to me, it was not clear. Statistically, there were definite elements that were positive. Rachel, push your button.
I was just going to say, are there ways that they can analyze these articles and select what they want to show? Like, it seems to me you can kind of, even though a meta-analysis is supposed to be the gold standard, it seems to me you can kind of manipulate this situation.
That's why you do an appraisal, because you can have bias and you can have manipulation in any article that's published. It can be in the most prestigious journal out there. If the researchers manipulated and picked the types of things they wanted it to be, you could absolutely show a bias.
I think this is why like reviewing articles gets so frustrating, because you feel like you're
that's why we're doing this together.
Who are manipulating the data to show what they want to show.
So we've only got like 1 minute, but I want to go to the final questions. It says, can the results be applied to our population? So if we were looking at this, say we had nothing in place, it might make me think. To me, it's not the best of articles in terms of how the data was presented. There are some errors in how they present, they did their tables, and maybe it's just somebody didn't tell them how to do it. I'm surprised it was published, with exactly the way it looked, because you didn't have a key, and maybe those giant triangles were saying, this is my clinical significance, and it was amazing. If that had been clarified, and it was statistically significant, I would be saying a different tune. I'd be saying, hey, this is a great article, let's apply it. It at least tells me, you know what? I want to go and dig into those 14 articles. I want to see what it was about the reminder or what it was about the stop order that they saw in those articles. So it would be enough to say this is something to dig deeper into, but you always have to think about, okay, could this apply? Yes, it could absolutely apply to our population. We're actually doing this. So if we were seeing if our practice was the best practice, I'd say we're already there. We're already doing things above what they recognize. They didn't talk about any nurse-driven protocols in this. And the last is, would the article be something to make to make a difference in your outcomes? Possibly. So would this be one? How would you okay, the level of the study is definitely a 1. It didn't change. What would the quality of this article be? What do you think? I mean, some of it was good. I've heard some mediums. What do you all thinking, Bertie? Small, medium, high, medium, low. What do you think? Oh, you're muted? Oh, there you. I think we can hear you.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
What are your thoughts?
I'd say medium.
So if Bertie, you had nothing in place for your COTIs, would this make you think? What do you think you would do with this article? It's okay not to know.
Well, maybe consider putting something in place. Maybe checking with our sister facility and seeing what they have in place.
And that's part of the teamwork here. But I liked this article and the fact it had good and bad. And just know that the best of the articles may not be perfect. It's rare that we have a perfect article. My goal was to talk less and get through both of them, but what we'll do for our next month is to look at that randomized control article. What I would like for you to do, if you're working on projects right now and you have an article that you would like us to review, we can do the randomized control article and then we'll pull another one up. My purpose in doing these together is to help you understand. It's not rocket science. It's a relatively easy process to follow. Some of the articles, though, you may go, oh my gosh, I have no idea. If it is not clear enough to help you understand, have somebody else read it with you. We can have a dialogue with it. If somebody finds a really, really bad article, let me know. I would love to show it. Or if somebody finds a really, really good one. The randomized control trial that we're going to look at is actually pretty well done. So we'll look at that as well as any additional articles next week. Or next month, do you think, having spent 3 months looking at article appraisal, is that going to be enough to help you with the process? Or do you feel really comfortable and you're ready to move on to new content? You don't have to answer today. I'm going to email you that question because we can do the randomized control trial next month and then start moving forward with content, because I don't want to just keep going too slowly, but I also don't want to go too fast. So any questions? Was this helpful with the systematic reviews? Well, thank you so much. Everything's posted in folder 4, month 4. All the information, all the articles. I'll send out a reminder for next month. Please send me your articles, good or bad. And if you need help with appraisals, please let me know and I'll be happy to help you. Thanks and have a great month. And please fill out those evaluation forms. That helps us get our CEs. Any questions, Inverti? Are you guys have any questions? Okay. So let me stop this.
Question.
I just keep. Yes.
How do you determine where that center line is? What
It should be.
That?
It should still be it should be the median of the confidence interval. And that should be the null line. Well, they take all the data and they'll come up with, yeah, it'll be the mean average for all of them.
Got it. Thank you.
As you guys come across articles, I'd be happy to get on the phone and review them with you. Have a wonderful day. Okay.
I have